Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a really tough case today, the disappearance and death of 11-year-old Audrii Cunningham in Livingston, Texas, back in February 2024. We're going to go through the timeline meticulously, trying to understand how this unfolded.
Yeah, a case that really grabbed a lot of people's attention, and as we go through it, I think it'll become clear why.
Yeah.
The timeline itself is just it's chilling how it progresses.
So our goal here is to kind of lay out the facts as they emerged as best we can, looking at news reports, video, transcripts, really anything we could get our hands on, publicly available information to try to make sense of this tragedy. So let's start with Thursday, February 15th, 2024. That was the last day that Audrii was seen. She was 11 years old, near her home on Lakeside Drive in Livingston around 7 a.m., wearing a black hoodie, white lettering, black pants, and she either had a camel-colored backpack or a Hello Kitty backpack.
And right off the bat, I mean, it's important to point out that Audrii had a routine. Usually she would walk her dog to the bus stop. But on this particular morning, it seems that she didn't.
Yeah.
And that little change in her normal routine would later become, a really big red flag.
Right. I mean, missing the bus is one thing, but not even getting to the bus stop. For an 11-year-old, that really suggests something was wrong right away.
Totally. It's that absence from the bus that really is the first, clear indicator that something wasn't right that morning. Something was off.
Yeah. The alarm bells really started going off later that day. Around 5:30 p.m., Audrii's family reported her missing. And initially, their worry was that she hadn't gotten off the bus after school. But then, their concern obviously just went through the roof when they found out she hadn't even been on the bus at all that day.
Yeah. Like you said, it totally changes things, right? It goes from maybe something happened after school to something must have happened before school even started. Right. And very quickly after the missing person report and confirming she wasn't on the bus, an Amber Alert was issued. And when you hear Amber Alert, things are serious.
Absolutely. The criteria for issuing an Amber Alert usually involve, law enforcement believing that a child has been abducted and that they're in imminent danger.
Yeah.
So the fact that one was put out so quickly in Audrii's case really speaks to how worried the authorities were right away.
Right from the get-go. And they started immediately talking to anyone who might have information, persons of interest, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning.
Yeah. And those early stages, investigators are just trying to get their hands on anything, talking to family, friends, anyone who might have seen her, anyone who had any kind of connection to her disappearance, just trying to piece together okay, where was she last and see if anything pops up.
Yeah. And by that evening, February 15th, the search had really expanded. You have the Polk County Sheriff's Office, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and even the FBI, which, the FBI getting involved, that means they're taking it very seriously.
Yeah, for sure. The FBI brings a lot to the table. I mean, resources, expertise, especially in a case like this where maybe there's a chance the child has been taken across state lines, or if they need some really specific forensic stuff.
And a lot of that first evening was focused around Lake Livingston.
Yeah.
Boats on the water, search dogs in the surrounding areas.
Makes sense, right? Lake Livingston's, it's a big lake, so, it's a logical place to look first, especially if there was any indication that Audrii might have been near the lake. You got the boats for the water, and the dogs can track on land.
Right. And then, adding to all of this, early on, some neighbors were saying they thought they might have seen Audrii in a vehicle with someone that morning, around 6:37.
Yeah. And even if those eyewitness accounts are kind of shaky, based on maybe what they think they saw, they can still be incredibly helpful for investigators. It's all about building that timeline, and figuring out who she might have been with.
Yeah.
And it's so important for people to come forward, even if they're not sure. Even if they think it's nothing, they should still say something.
Absolutely. And the search near Lake Livingston that Thursday night, they kept at it pretty late. But as it got dark, it just wasn't safe to keep going, so they had to stop. But the plan was to get right back out there at first light on Friday the 16th.
Yeah. Calling off the search overnight, that's usually about keeping the search teams safe, but wanting to get started again as soon as possible. That really shows how urgent it was. They didn't want to waste any time.
Right. So Friday morning comes around, and it's right back to it. This huge search operation around Lake Livingston.
Seeing them pour so much energy, so many resources into it, really shows how serious they were about finding her. It was all hands on deck.
Yeah. And on Friday, the officials released something very important to the public, an image of what they called a vehicle of interest, a 2003 dark blue Chevy Suburban. They thought it could be connected to Audrei's disappearance.
Right, and getting that kind of information out to the public is a huge part of these missing person investigations. It's like having thousands of extra eyes out there. Someone might have seen something, anything, that could be the missing piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Sadly, that same Friday, investigators found something very concerning. A backpack at the dam that looked like it belonged to a child. And they were examining the contents, and it was wet.
Finding a wet backpack near the dam, especially one that might belong to a child, I mean, that's a huge red flag. It just makes you think about the water,
Yeah.
and it raises the stakes even higher. It was just a terrible sign.
And on that Friday, a specific person became the focus of the investigation, a man named Don Stephen McDougal, 42 years old, from Livingston. And his connection to Audrei's family is what makes this so disturbing. He was a friend of Audrei's father, and he actually lived in a camper behind their home.
Yeah, and that connection to the family, it just adds this whole other layer of creepiness to the case.
Yeah.
Him living so close to Audrei's home, I mean, that would have immediately raised questions for investigators.
McDougal was arrested that Friday, but not because of Audrei's disappearance. They took him in on an unrelated aggravated assault charge from the summer before, some kind of stabbing incident.
Yeah, and even though it was for a different crime, getting him into custody meant they could question him about Audrey without him being out there somewhere. And it gave them a chance to maybe find some evidence.
Right. They were also asking the public, if anyone had seen McDougal's 2003 Chevy Suburban on Thursday or Friday. They wanted to know everything about where he'd been.
Yeah. And that just emphasizes how important that vehicle was to the case. It was all about placing McDougal and that Suburban during those critical hours when Audrey disappeared.
And they were not messing around. Polk County Crime Stoppers offered a $7,000 reward for any tips leading to an arrest in Audrei's case.
Yeah. Money talks sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Putting a reward out there, it can motivate people who might be on the fence about coming forward with information.
Exactly. They actually caught McDougal on surveillance video that Friday before they questioned him, driving around Livingston.
Security cameras, I mean, they're everywhere these days. And that footage, it can be crucial in an investigation. It can back up what someone says or contradict it. It helps paint a picture of where they were and when.
Yeah. And a lot of the investigation that Friday was still focused on that area around the Lake Livingston Dam, which, probably because of the backpack.
Makes sense. They must have believed that the dam held some important clues. Maybe it was the last place she was seen, or maybe something happened there.
Late Friday night, they officially booked Don Stephen McDougal into the Polk County Jail on that aggravated assault charge.
And even though it was a separate charge, keeping him locked up gave investigators the chance to keep digging into Audrei's disappearance without worrying about him running or, messing with the investigation.
Right. Saturday, February 17th rolls around, and the search was still going strong. Texas EquuSearch, they're known for helping out with missing persons cases. They joined the search at Lake Livingston.
Yeah, Texas EquuSearch, they're pros. They bring a lot of experience resources. They often use volunteers and have, advanced search techniques that can cover a lot of ground.
Sadly, despite all their efforts that Saturday, Texas EquuSearch didn't find any sign of Audrey.
And that's just a heartbreaking setback to have so many people working so hard and still coming up empty. It just makes the whole situation that much more grim.
On Sunday, February 18th, the focus of the search shifted. They moved from Lake Livingston to the Trinity River, that area near US 59 and the Trinity River Bridge.
That change in location, it tells you that investigators were probably following new leads, or maybe zeroing in on places that McDougal might have had connections to, places he might have driven based on what they were finding out.
And that Sunday, a private prayer vigil was held at the VFW post in Polk County. A chance for Audrei's family and the community to come together, offer support, hope.
Yeah, those vigils, they're so important for communities during times like this. It's a way to come together, support the family, and just hold on to hope together.
Right. And they kept searching along the Trinity River into the next week. Monday, February 19th, they were still at it. And they even contacted the Trinity River Authority to lower the water level.
Wow. asking them to lower the water level, that's a big deal. It shows that investigators really thought Audrey might be in the river. And getting those levels down would make a huge difference. They could see more and get to places that were underwater before.
Yeah. But on Tuesday, February 20th, the search came to a devastating end. Around 1 p.m., they found Audrii Cunningham's body in the Trinity River under U.S. Highway 59.
That discovery, I mean, it was the end of the search, but the beginning of trying to understand what happened to her
Mm-hmm.
and making sure someone was held responsible.
It was a terrible scene. Her body was underwater, tied to a large rock with a rope, which, right away that tells you this was no accident.
Yeah. Weighing the body down like that, it shows they were trying to hide what they did, and it just screams that this is a violent crime.
That afternoon, Polk County Sheriff Byron Lyons, he announced the discovery, confirmed that Audrey's body had been found, and they discontinued the Amber Alert.
And that announcement, it must have been just devastating for everyone, the community, the family, but it's also a recognition of all the people who worked so hard to find her.
Yeah. Sheriff Lyons, he expressed his condolences to Audrey's family, and he made it very clear that they would do everything they could to get justice for her.
Yeah. And hearing the sheriff say that, it must have meant a lot to the family. Just that assurance that they were going to do everything they could to find out who did this and hold them accountable.
And the Polk County District Attorney, Shelley Sitton, she also spoke to the public and said that arrest warrants were being prepared for Don Stephen McDougal for capital murder. And remember, he was already in custody on that other charge.
So saying that they were going for capital murder charges, that tells you they had some serious evidence connecting McDougal to Audrey's death.
And the evidence they had collected, it was pretty substantial. I mean, they analyzed cell phone records, videos that people had sent in, and they even got some information directly from McDougal himself. And all of that helped them focus the search.
Yeah, the digital evidence, like those phone records, plus the community coming together to share those videos, and then whatever McDougal told them, all of that coming together really helped investigators narrow things down.
They brought in the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office to determine the exact cause and manner of death.
Which makes sense. They needed a qualified medical expert to examine Audrey's body and figure out exactly what happened. That information is crucial for the investigation and for any legal proceedings down the line.
And they also confirmed that the backpack they found at the dam, it was definitely Audrey's.
So that really cemented the importance of that dam area in the timeline. It strongly suggests that she was there at some point.
It turned out that McDougal had actually admitted to being with Audrey on the morning she disappeared, but he lied about where they went after that.
Yeah.
He did take investigators to at least one place, but never confessed.
So he admits to being with her, but then tries to cover his tracks. I mean, that's a huge red flag. It would make anyone suspicious.
And then this was really disturbing. The rope that was used to tie Audrey's body to the rock, it matched rope that had been seen in McDougal's vehicle during a traffic stop before all of this happened. So that was a direct link.
Yeah, I mean, that's a smoking gun. That rope, that physical evidence tying McDougal to the scene, that would have been huge for the case against him.
And they were able to determine that Audrey had actually died on the same day she disappeared, that Thursday, February 15th.
And that's crucial, right? Knowing the time of death, it helps build that timeline, helps piece together the whole story, and it can either support or contradict other evidence they've gathered.
Wednesday, February 21st, the day after they found Audrey's body, the autopsy results came back. Homicidal violence, including blunt force trauma to the head.
So that just reinforces how violent the attack on Audrey was. That blunt force trauma, it paints a very grim picture.
That same day, they started uncovering some really disturbing stuff about McDougal's past. Back in 2007, he was convicted in Brazoria County for enticing a child with intent.
And that conviction right there, it raises so many questions about, how these kinds of crimes are handled and the loopholes that might exist in the system when it comes to protecting children.
He got 2 years in prison for that, but because of a plea deal, he didn't have to register as a sex offender.
And sadly, the victim from that 2007 case, she spoke out and said she felt like the system had failed both her and Audrey, which, just highlights the ripple effect of these kinds of crimes.
Absolutely. And Audrey's family also released a statement expressing their grief, their devastation, and one of the things that came out in that statement was just shocking. Don Stephen McDougal, he had been living in a camper in their backyard. They had allowed him to stay there. They're people of faith. They wanted to give him a second chance, but they had no idea about his full criminal history. They said the system had failed them too.
It's heartbreaking. They showed him kindness, they trusted him, and he betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. And it really does raise questions about how easy it is to find out about someone's past and how important that information is.
There was a memorial service for Audrii Cunningham on March 2nd, 2024. A chance for the community to come together, remember her, grieve.
Memorial services are so important for healing. It's a time for the community to mourn together, support the family, and just acknowledge the loss of this young life.
Then on April 22nd, 2024, they officially indicted Don Stephen McDougal on 2 counts of capital murder for Audrei's death. That was a major step forward in the legal process.
Yeah, that indictment basically kicked off the prosecution phase. They were moving forward with holding him accountable for what he did.
And then on January 17th of this year, 2025, Don Stephen McDougal pleaded guilty to the murder of Audrii Cunningham. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He couldn't get the death penalty because he was deemed intellectually and developmentally disabled.
So his guilty plea, it brought some closure to the legal side of things. He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life. And the decision about the death penalty, it's a complex issue, especially given his disabilities.
Audrei's family, they were there in the courtroom when he pleaded guilty. And you can imagine the emotions. They were just overwhelmed with grief and anger.
Yeah. To be face to face with the person who took their daughter from them. I can't even imagine what that must have been like, just the rawness of those emotions.
But even with all of their grief, they've been incredibly strong. They've become advocates for change. They're pushing for Audrei's law. And this law is all about closing loopholes in the sex offender registry, especially for convictions like the one McDougal had, the one that didn't require him to register.
It's inspiring to see them turn their pain into action. They're fighting to make sure Audrei's death leads to real change, to make the system better, and hopefully prevent something like this from happening again.
This whole timeline, it's just heartbreaking. It shows how quickly things can escalate. A missing child 1 minute, a capital murder investigation the next.
And it just highlights how vulnerable kids are and how important it is to act fast when something like this happens. Every minute counts.
Law enforcement, they did incredible work. They were thorough, they were meticulous, and the community really stepped up too, sharing information, tips, and all that, along with the forensic evidence. It led them to Audrey and to her killer.
It was a team effort, for sure. The police, the community, everyone working together. And it's so important in these kinds of cases.
This case has brought so much sadness to Audrei's family, to Livingston, but it's also, sparked this push for change to really examine how we protect children.
It's a stark reminder that the systems we have in place, they're not perfect. And we need to constantly be looking at them, making sure they're as strong as they can be to keep kids safe.
So as you've heard all of this, we encourage you to think about this case, all the complexities, the tragedy of it all, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can share them in the comments below.